most people don't really, they see a stream like this, they don't understand it's connected to a watershed. So the Park River Regional Watershed is a 78 square mile watershed. Most people would call this the Hog River, and they would also call the South Branch the Hog River. But in fact, in an 1894 editorial in the Hartford Courant, the writers tell people to stop calling the tributaries the Hog River and reminded the citizens of Hartford that these rivers, the North and the South branches of the Park River, were named after Hartford's first public park, Bushnell Park. So the extraordinary breadth of what we see here, invasive species, a parking lot that needs to be restored as a floodplain, and then on this side, a piece of land that's been conserved. So we have this huge mosaic of conditions that are beautiful and interesting, and just a 5 or 10 minute walk away from where many people live. This is a floodplain parking lot, and as you can see, it's subject to flooding. And that means it floods regularly, like 2 or 3 times a season. But what's important to point out is that if we built something like a parking lot or a roadway or a bicycle trail, then you have to remove these sediments constantly. Everything gets moved into a pile, and it either gets pushed downstream to the next property. This is something that could be restored. All the mud here, instead of removing it from the pavement, you could restore the floodplain so that when there are flood waters, they could infiltrate the soil. We could have some kind of a wet meadow here and create some functional wetland services. This is a rain garden that we built with students from the Classical Magnet School in 2008. And periodically we have groups of volunteers that want to work on the maintenance, the pruning, the composition of the rain garden. We need to be able to capture the full volume of stormwater runoff coming from the area of that parking lot rather than shunt it directly into a local waterway.
So we are at the beautiful Scantic River, and the site we're at right now is what we call the Old Melrose Bridge location, located in East Windsor. The river is about 38 miles in length. It has its headwaters in Stafford, Connecticut, and then it goes north into Massachusetts, Hampton, Massachusetts, comes back into Connecticut in Somers, Connecticut, then it goes through Enfield, East Windsor, and then finally South Windsor, where it joins the Connecticut River. It's very rural here, but the river flows through active agriculture areas, residential areas, industrial areas, commercial areas. So the river encounters a lot of different land uses. I mean, I think there's a lot of different challenges that we're kind of working on, all these various organizations. So I actually run the Scantic River Water Monitoring Project. I have a wonderful team of volunteers that go out and collect water samples once a month, and then we test them for nitrogen, phosphorus, a variety of other contaminants. And this river has some of the highest nitrogen and phosphorus levels of a lot of other smaller watersheds in the state.
We're standing here on a antique bridge that was built in 1888. We got the grant, had a bridge made. They put in abutment on either side off of the bridge, and then the new bridge was brought in from where it was built and brought down here, and with a crane they set it in place, never touching the old bridge. We have a New Year's Day walk, and we've had as many as 300 people show up. It's where you can get away and still do your thing.
We are standing at the ruins of the Hazard Powder Works. This facility supplied gunpowder for about 100 years. In the early 1800s, there were about 200 buildings in this area here, and they were mostly powered by water from the Scantic, and it ran until 1913, until there was a huge explosion which occurred right downstream here. The explosion was heard in Springfield and Hartford, Connecticut. And after that explosion, the company decided it was time to close down operations. A few years ago, I heard about the Scantic River Watershed Association and decided to join. We have several functions during the year. In fact, our biggest fundraiser was the Spring Splash kayak and canoe race. And you'll see there's a couple of wrecks that didn't make it through the race, but the paddlers were okay.
This doesn't look like a river because it's the bypass for the fish ladder, which connects these two spillways from the old mill dam just up north, and then it flows right back out into the 8-Mile River. We decided that it was best to, if we could, to put in a fish ladder in order to transport anadromous fish up into the main stem of the 8-Mile. The 8-Mile is protected perhaps for different reasons than some of the other wild and scenic rivers, in the sense that the 8-Mile is not necessarily that visible. You don't really see it, you have to go and find it, which is good because what it means is that the 8-Mile is surrounded by natural habitat as opposed to roads and houses, etc., etc.
We're looking at a bridge over the 8-Mile River, but this was 3 different properties that were put together to protect these 100 acres. And this is where we start the Goodwin Trail. It's 14 miles long now, and it goes all the way from East Haddam to East Lyme. So the 8-Mile starts down 8 miles from the mouth of the river, Connecticut River, goes through Whalebone Cove, and then about 3 miles up it splits into the East Branch and West Branch. The area itself, was mostly farmed. It is reverting now to woods, which is evident because there are miles and miles, hundreds of miles of stone walls. For people that are looking for a really unique place to come, whether you're fishing, picnicking, hiking the dozens of miles of trails, you see a unique New England watershed as it was probably when the earliest settlers arrived. One of the projects that we put in place, or started actually several years ago, was the concept of making this bridge in this particular area where we're talking from here ADA accessible. This is becoming a more and more popular place for just hiking, but also for fishermen to gain access, because for so many years it was privately owned.
Well, we're here on the east branch of the 8-Mile River, about, I'd say a quarter to a half a mile above the confluence between the west and the east branch of the river. So in about 2015, we did a dam removal, and the fish are now coming up here. Our alewives and our blue-black herring are now using this stretch of the river. The removal of the dam really opened this area up in terms of rejuvenation of the original habitat types, in terms of getting our migrating herring up in there and all those species that use it. We have been very fortunate in this effort in terms of protection of the watershed, that we have the 3 communities, the 3 largest communities, Salem, East Haddam, and Lyme. There was great public support for the concept of sort of restoration and protection of the river system.
The Salmon River watershed is located in eastern Connecticut. It is part of the Connecticut River watershed. It is 149 square miles, and it is one of the largest watershed wholly in the state of Connecticut, meaning all its headwaters are in Connecticut. It's also one of the rivers that is still stocked for salmon fry as part of the Salmon Genetic Legacy Program. This is all protected land, and so this is all accessible to the public. This is where people come to fish. They come to float, they come to just put their feet in the river when it's a hot summer day. This is a different river section because there is a lot of hemlock here, and that really kind of nestles the river in. It's steep on both sides. This river has a lot of drop to it in sections. So these hemlocks here serve to cool the river down and keep the river shaded. We have also become an important destination for students to come and get experience and get field learning experience. I've been in touch with a number of the ones that have worked with us, and they are now working for the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management doing wetland surveys. They are working for Department of Public Health here in Connecticut, They're working for consultants. They are environmental engineers. This has been such a great experience for them, and it has been their first stepping stone that has allowed them to now be, working professionals. And so that's one of the things that I'm most proud of, because that's our future.
I've been a fly fisherman for probably 20, 25, almost 30 years now. I've been fishing all my life since I was about 8 years old, but I've only taken up fly fishing about 25 years ago. The Salmon River is I think it's about a 10-mile long river. It begins at the confluence of the Jeremy and the Blackledge Rivers. It's a nice small river. I mean, it's easily wadable. The real nice thing is going through the state forest. You get to see lots of wildlife. You get to see eagles, osprey, all kinds of birds, woodpeckers. I've seen fisher cats and mink and deer crossing the river. But I think it's important for the next generation to be able to experience this kind of good fishing, to see this kind of wildlife, and just get the outdoor experience. There's also been talk for years about removing the dam that's down at the bottom of the river. Years ago, historically, there used to be a good, strong salmon population that used to come up the Salmon River. That's how it got its name. But when they built the power dam down below, that stopped a lot of the migration. I know they've put in fish ladders, and that has helped. But today there's a lot of anadromous fish that don't go any farther past the dam. So one nice thing would be is that they eventually took the dam out. I think that would make for a healthier river all around.
So we are standing on the banks of Farmington River in Canton, in an area we call Crystal Rapids. So the Farmington River is 81 miles long. It starts in Beckett, Massachusetts, and it flows all the way into Farmington, Connecticut, where it takes a 180-degree turn and then flows north through the Farmington Valley towns of Avon, Simsbury, Granby, East Granby, and then it takes a turn towards the Connecticut River and flows through Windsor, Connecticut. The Farmington River flows in all cardinal directions. So we have the river flowing south and then turning and flowing north. And the reason that it takes that big turn in Farmington is because it was a glacial lake. That lake dammed up and built until it melted and broke through the Terriffill Gorge. The Farmington River Watershed Association started in 1953. It was a concerned group of citizens because the river was very polluted. Since the 50s, it's definitely cleaned up, but the best reason to protect the Farmington River is for its drinking water quality. It's the drinking water source for the Metropolitan District Commission through their reservoir system, and that feeds all of Hartford County. Our organization for I think it's about 16 years now has been water quality monitoring the upper and lower river. And so we have data for 15 years. This will be our 16th. And we just started adding in monitoring in Massachusetts. This will be our 3rd year. So we're proud to be a watchdog group for the river. And in addition to our water quality monitoring, we're also doing ambient temperature monitoring to get information from the river if things are changing from development or climate change. Farmington River has a variety of recreational opportunities. There are magnificent boating opportunities from beginner to expert. You can see behind us there's rapids. An advanced or expert kayaker can go through and have a great time. But then there's a lot of flat water paddling in Avon and Simsbury that's great for a beginner trying it out for a first time. This is a world-class fishing location, mostly because of the dams on the upper river that are the reservoir system of the MDC. Even if you're not a water sports person, you can enjoy the river by biking or walking along its trails.
We're here at the canoe and boat launch in Middletown, Connecticut on the Coginchaug River. The area out here is called the Floating Meadows, and the Coginchaug River goes about a half a mile to the Mattabasset River. There's a lot of interesting history here. This area started off as a clay mine, and then it became a horse racing track. And later on, it became an industrial site where they built cars and then bicycles. And the last use that this area had was building typewriters. The Remington Rand silent typewriter factory was right up the hill here. And it used to be one of the best trout fishing rivers in New England, but because of dams and dumping sewage and industrial waste into the river, it was damaged a lot. It had a lot of, the wildlife has declined and the fishing has declined. It now has to be stocked in order for there to be trout in the river. I believe it was 2016, the Jonah Center organized the first community pull to go out and collect water chestnuts. At that first community pull, we had 48 kayaks go out and pulled out, bag after bag of full of water chestnut. Well, the community sees these as a great resource to protect because they realize that places like this are disappearing and they're a treasure to the community that needs to be protected. This floating meadows is actually pretty unique along the Connecticut River now. Most of the regions that were like this have disappeared over the years. It's a tidal marsh and it has a broad diversity of wildlife. I think there's about 48 different fish that are found in the Connecticut River and 23 of them can be found here. It's a very important area and the people in Middletown recognize how unique it is and how easy it is to go from being in the city a few blocks away to being in nature and, largely unspoiled in some ways. What we're seeing here today is the results of a really heavy rain last night. In the spring, what happens is these floating meadows, they do flood and the water comes out of the banks of the river. If you were here in the summer or any other time of year, you would see that the tree line there and the tree line here are actually the banks of the Coginchaug River, but the water has come up several feet above the banks. And so this is a unique view, and it's actually a good thing that it floods periodically because it flushes out the area and it deposits nutrients. So that's part of the reason why the floating meadows is such a rich and diverse area for wildlife.
Whalebone Cove is 100+ acres of marsh and wetland off the Connecticut River. We're about 11 miles north of Long Island Sound. In 2013, there was a joining of efforts between the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They did a property exchange of some kind which included about 66 acres around the cove that protected it in the Silvio O. Conti Wildlife Refuge. So we are part of that group, and we've worked really hard as a small grassroots group to be well connected. We've got just a growing number of fabulous volunteers who they don't necessarily live right around the cove because that's a limited number of people. We're up to 100 members, and that's probably 60 or 65 households every year who join our group. They give us a nominal amount of money, and they come out in their kayaks and help pull invasives with us. The biggest problems we thought we had was with water chestnut, trappa, that had started to come into this cove and had taken over a lot of Selden Cove, which is one cove south of us off the Connecticut River. So we started working there and here, just doing scouting here to make sure it hadn't come into the cove. There's an S that comes into our cove which protects it beautifully, and Selden is much more open with Selden Island and Selden Creek. So we did an invasive plant management document with Judy Preston in 2019, and that identified a lot of invasive plant species that we have since tried to take one at a time and control. It's a beautiful cove. It changes constantly during the year. This is the largest stand of wild rice in Connecticut, which on its own is kind of a big deal. It can clog the cove a little bit, but it provides food and habitat for red-winged blackbirds and all kinds of migrating ducks and waterfowl. People love to come and kayak in here. It's really quiet. It's just a gem. And a lot of people don't know about it. So we want to tell them and hope they can enjoy it too. I mean, when you're in a kayak, you are in the water. You're not swimming, but you're in the water. And a turtle, we have this ginormous turtle that's about the size of a garbage can top, lives in the cove, and all of a sudden it'll like knock against your kayak. And there are turtles, lots of egrets and blue herons, and you just never know what you're gonna find when you walk along Ferry Road.